What if the sibling you never knew existed was living just a few miles away your entire life? Emily and Michael were both adopted into loving homes, grew up in different states, and never imagined that a missing piece of their identity was walking the same earth, breathing the same air, until a simple Christmas gift, a DNA test, opened a door that neither of them knew had been locked. What they discovered not only shook their world, but left them staring at the screen in total silence, frozen, speechless. This isn't just another story about DNA. This is about fate, identity, and two hearts reconnecting after a lifetime apart. Emily Sanders had always known she was adopted. Growing up in the peaceful suburbs of Portland, Oregon, she was raised by two wonderful parents, warm, supportive, and fiercely proud of her. But no matter how loved she felt, there was always a whisper inside her, a subtle ache she couldn't quite name. It wasn't sadness, not exactly, more like a space, an empty seat at the table of her life. She'd lie awake some nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering who had given her up, and why. What kind of people had her nose, her sense of humor, her restless curiosity that never seemed to turn off? Her adoptive parents answered every question they could, but the truth was, they didn't know much. The agency had closed years ago, and the trail had gone cold. Across the country, in a busy Chicago neighborhood, Michael Reeves felt something eerily similar. His childhood was noisy, joyful, and full of chaos in the best way. His adoptive mum was a nurse, his dad a high school basketball coach, and weekends meant backyard barbecues with neighbors and cousins who weren't related by blood but felt like family anyway. Still, Michael had questions, not just about where he came from, but who he came from. He always had this feeling that someone out there shared his smile, maybe even his love for old Motown records and lemon pepper wings. His parents had been honest. He was adopted at birth and there was no information about his biological family. "But you're ours," his mother would say, pressing a kiss to his forehead. And he was. But still, he wondered. For years, both Emily and Michael buried that ache beneath busy lives. Emily graduated from college with a degree in environmental science, working on sustainability projects in California and traveling whenever she could. Michael became a youth counselor, passionate about helping teens find purpose and confidence in their own voices. Both had built lives that looked full from the outside, but still, something was missing. The turning point came during the holidays. It was a quiet December afternoon when Emily's best friend Sarah handed her a gift wrapped in snowflake paper. "You're impossible to shop for," Sarah laughed, "so I got you something weird." Inside the box was a home DNA test kit. "I figured, why not?" Sarah shrugged. "You always talk about wanting to know more about where you're from. Might as well get some answers." Emily hesitated. Part of her had learned to accept the unknown, to live with the blank spaces. But that night, she registered the kit online, spit into the tube and mailed it off, just like that. A week later, across the country, Michael's girlfriend Alyssa gave him the same idea. "Let's both do it," she said. "Maybe you'll find something interesting." Michael chuckled, skeptical. "What, like that I'm royalty?" Alyssa grinned. "You never know." Neither of them had any clue what they were about to unlock. As the days passed and the results processed, Emily and Michael went back to their lives. Work, friends, weekend errands. They didn't sit by the mailbox waiting, but they both thought about it more than they admitted. They didn't know that a hidden thread, woven through time, secrecy, and circumstance, was about to tighten. That a bond broken at birth was inching its way back to the surface. They didn't know, but they were about to. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Emily was sipping her coffee, half listening to a podcast, when her phone buzzed with a notification. "Your DNA results are ready." Her heart skipped, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of possibility. She clicked the link and waited for the page to load. unaware that in another state, at that same moment, Michael was staring at the exact same email. They had no reason to think this would be anything more than ancestry percentages. A fun breakdown of ethnic roots, maybe a distant third cousin or two. But when Emily scrolled down, something stopped her cold. Possible close relative, Michael Reeves, estimated relationship, sibling. Her breath caught. The word didn't compute. She blinked, reread, and read again. There had to be a mistake. Sibling, she clicked on the profile. Michael Reeves, age 31, location, Chicago, Illinois. His profile photo was just a default silhouette, no real picture, but her heart was pounding so hard now she could barely sit still. Emily stared at the screen, frozen. The world around her felt suddenly too loud, too bright. She had a brother? Meanwhile, in Chicago, Michael was having the exact same reaction. He had opened his results on his lunch break, expecting nothing more than 60% West African, 20% European, or something similarly generic. But then he saw it. Possible close relative, Emily Sanders, estimated relationship, sibling. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. Sibling, he clicked on her profile, Oregon, environmental scientist, 30 years old. His hands were trembling. He didn't have siblings. He'd grown up as an only child. His parents couldn't have kids biologically. He never imagined someone was out there, with his blood, his DNA, his roots. At first, they both thought it had to be wrong, a fluke, some kind of technical error. Emily jumped into research mode. She pulled up the DNA test site's FAQ section, diving into how they calculated matches. But the science was clear. A sibling match wasn't vague or speculative. It was based on shared centimorgans, a measurement of genetic similarity. And theirs, over 2,500 cetim. That wasn't a maybe. That was a fact. They shared a parent, or maybe both. She messaged him. Just one line. Hi. I just got my DNA results. I think we need to talk. Michael didn't answer right away. He stared at the message for nearly an hour, unsure how to respond. What do you say to someone who might be your sister? Finally, he wrote back. Hey, Emily. Yeah. I saw the same thing. I'm in shock. And with that, the wall between them began to crack. Over the next few hours, they exchanged cautious, trembling messages. They compared birthdays, just a year apart, adoption agencies, hospital records, everything lined up. They both had been adopted through different branches of the same system, just a year apart, no overlapping paperwork, no reason to suspect a connection, until now. I always felt like someone was missing, Emily wrote. Me too, Michael replied. But I never thought it could be real. I mean, a sibling? They shared photos, old baby pictures, teenage smiles, side-by-side comparisons, and the resemblance hit them like a punch in the chest. The same dimples, the same eyes, even the same way their mouths curled slightly to the left when they smiled. Emily burst into tears. It felt like looking into a mirror she didn't know existed. Michael felt dizzy. He stared at their side-by-side photo on his screen and whispered to himself, I have a sister. The shock wasn't just in the DNA. It was in the realization that their whole lives had been shaped by a decision they never got to make. That someone, somewhere, had separated them for reasons neither of them yet understood. But even through the disbelief, a new feeling began to bloom beneath the surface. Connection, not just through blood, but through story. Through that aching absence they had both carried for so long. Now, the door was open, and nothing would ever be the same again. Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the messages with Michael over and over in her mind. Her thoughts swirled like leaves in a storm. How was it possible that she'd spent 30 years unaware of someone who shared her DNA, who maybe even remembered her from before? The next morning, she called in sick to work. This wasn't a day for meetings or spreadsheets. This was a day for answers. Michael was already ahead of her. He'd barely slept either. As soon as the sun rose, he pulled out every piece of documentation his adoptive parents had ever given him. Letters, hospital forms, even a grainy photo of the social worker who'd handled his adoption. He hadn't looked at this stuff in years. Later that afternoon, they jumped on a video call. It was surreal, seeing each other's faces move, hearing each other's voices. Emily noticed how Michael furrowed his brow the same way she did when thinking. Michael couldn't stop staring at the curve of her nose, his nose. They compared everything, both born in the same hospital in San Diego, Emily in 1993, Michael in 1992. Both adoptions processed through a now-defunct agency called New Roots Family Services. Michael's birth certificate listed no biological parents, just confidential. Emily's said the same. "It's like they erased everything," Emily whispered, clutching a mug with trembling hands. Michael nodded. "But not everything. They didn't erase us." With that quiet fire, they started digging. Emily contacted the state's adoption records office, requesting any non-identifying info on her biological family. It would take weeks, maybe months. Red tape, privacy laws. But she filed the paperwork anyway. Michael took a different route. He found a Facebook group for adoptees from the 90s in California and posted a question. Anyone adopted through New Roots Family Services between 1990 and 1995? The responses trickled in slowly. Most didn't know anything more than he did, but one woman messaged him privately. "My mum used to work at New Roots. She kept some old documents after it shut down. Want me to check?" Michael's heart pounded. They waited 3 days. Then the message came. The woman had found a list, an internal spreadsheet, water-damaged but mostly legible. It listed babies placed for adoption over a 5-year span. Michael and Emily were both on it. But what caught his eye was this. Next to Michael's name was a note in faded handwriting, twin separated at birth, female, Emily, preliminary name. Michael stared at the words, not breathing. Twin, separated at birth. He sent a screenshot to Emily, who called him instantly, her voice shaking. "Oh my God," she said, "we're not just siblings, we're twins." It was like the air had been sucked out of the world. Everything tilted, redefined. They had been together once, in the womb, maybe even for minutes, hours, days after birth, and then ripped apart, given to different families, different futures. "I don't understand," Emily said. "Why would they separate us?" Michael was already typing. He found a handful of archived newspaper articles about questionable adoption practices in California during the early 90s. Some agencies had been accused of separating twins to make placements easier. More families could be served that way. And New Roots had been quietly shut down during that time for reasons that had never been made public. They had been victims of a system that had played God with lives. "I feel like my entire identity is shifting," Emily whispered. "Like I'm standing on sand." But beneath the pain, there was something else rising. "We found each other," Michael said, voice steady now. "After everything, they didn't win. We're here." They made a decision that night. They would find out everything. No more secrets. No more silence. They wanted to know who their birth parents were, why they were given up, and why they were torn apart, not out of blame, but for healing, for truth. Over the next weeks, they continued the search. Emily hired a genetic genealogist. Michael combed through obituaries, public records, even yearbooks from the early 90s. Each clue added a piece to the puzzle, bringing them closer. And every night, they talked. Not just about the search, but about themselves, favorite movies, childhood stories, fears, dreams. A bond once severed was slowly being rewoven, thread by fragile thread. The day of the reunion arrived with a weight that felt impossible to carry. Emily stood at the gate of Chicago O'Hare, her carry-on in one hand, her phone trembling in the other, staring at the message from Michael. "I'm waiting by the arrivals board. Grey hoodie. Can't miss me." Her chest was tight, her heartbeat so loud she thought people nearby might hear it. The terminal buzzed with travelers, airport announcements, the scent of cinnamon pretzels, and cold air pouring in from the automatic doors. But for Emily, everything felt muted, distant. Her steps were slow, measured, like she was walking towards something sacred. Every second felt suspended. She rounded the corner near the escalators, her eyes scanning faces until, there, leaning against a pillar, tall, nervous, alive, Michael. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if the air between them had thickened with 3 decades of unanswered questions, of what-ifs, of broken roots slowly being sewn back together. Then Michael pushed off the column, his eyes locked onto hers, and they both walked, fast, then faster, until they collided in a fierce, trembling hug that said everything words couldn't. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't polished, it was real, it was raw. Her arms wrapped tight around his back, his around her shoulders, their bodies shaking not from cold, but from the sheer force of emotion. "I can't believe this," Emily whispered, her voice caught in her throat. "You're actually here." Michael laughed, a sound half broken and half disbelieving. "You're real, you're real, you're my sister." They stood there for minutes, neither one caring who stared. To the strangers around them, it was just another airport hug. But to Emily and Michael, it was the closing of a wound they hadn't known was bleeding for years. Later, over coffee in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe, they sat across from each other like mirror images from different lifetimes. The resemblance was undeniable. The same dimples, the same nervous tapping of fingers against the ceramic cup. Even the way they tilted their heads when listening. Identical. But what hit hardest wasn't the physical similarities. It was the familiarity, the unspoken ease. Like they were remembering someone they'd known all along. They talked for hours, about everything, about nothing. Childhoods, favorite foods, worst fears, dumb habits. Michael told her how he used to stay up late writing lyrics. He never showed anyone. Emily shared how she always felt this odd, inexplicable pull toward music she couldn't place. Like it was inherited from someone she hadn't met yet. They laughed at how both of them hated mushrooms but loved thunderstorms. At one point, Emily went quiet, staring down at her cup. "I used to imagine I had a sibling out there," she said softly, "but it felt stupid, like a fairy tale. I thought, if it were real, I would know. I would feel it." "You did," Michael said. "You just didn't know what it was." That night, Emily stayed at Michael's apartment. He gave her the guest room, but they ended up sitting on the couch past midnight, looking at old photos, comparing stories, retracing their separate timelines. They cried together for the first time when Emily showed him a photo of her adoptive mom, who had passed away 2 years earlier. "She would have loved you," she said, her voice trembling. "She always said I had too much energy for one person. Now I know why." Michael's eyes were glassy, his voice rough. "My dad used to say I had a fire in me that didn't come from him or Mom. Maybe it was you. Maybe we've always been carrying each other somehow." The next day, they visited the lakefront. It was cold, the kind of sharp winter chill that cuts through gloves, but they didn't care. They stood looking out over the frozen water, shoulder to shoulder, silent. There was nothing left to prove, no need to fill the space. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was whole. Before Emily flew back to Oregon, they made a pact. This wasn't going to be a one-time miracle. They were going to build something real. Weekends, calls, birthdays, holidays, maybe even a shared vacation. "I lost 30 years," Michael said, hugging her tight. "I'm not losing any more." Emily smiled, eyes full, heart steady. "You're stuck with me now, twin." And for the first time in their lives, that word, twin, felt not like a mystery or a myth, but a promise. It's strange how one truth, one shocking, miraculous truth, can reorganize every memory you've ever had. That's what happened to Emily and Michael. After their reunion, life didn't simply go back to normal. There was no normal anymore. Everything was colored by a new context. The empty spaces they had grown so used to living with, the quiet loneliness, the hidden ache, had names now, had faces, had each other. And as the weeks turned into months, they did something most people never get to do. They rebuilt their stories from the inside out. Emily found herself reliving childhood moments with new eyes. She remembered birthday parties where she always felt a strange twinge of sadness she could never explain. Now, she imagined Michael, somewhere, perhaps alone on his own birthday, feeling the same thing. They'd been grieving something they couldn't name, living parallel lives with a ghostly sense of absence hovering just out of reach. But now that ghost was gone, replaced by laughter, by real conversations, by photos of the two of them side by side, arms around each other, like they'd been doing it their whole lives. Michael, too, was transforming. For years, he had felt like a puzzle with one critical piece missing, like no matter how well he did, how much he accomplished, how many people he helped, there was a part of him that remained undefined. But with Emily in his life, everything shifted. The questions that once haunted him were no longer barriers. They were bridges. He started journaling again, something he'd stopped doing years ago. He found himself writing about hope, about destiny, about connection that defies time and logic. And for the first time, he allowed himself to forgive the past, not just the system that had failed them, but himself for carrying all that silent anger. Together, they began the process of uncovering their origins. The genealogist Emily had hired finally tracked down a name, a woman in San Diego who had given birth to twins in the early 90s. She had passed away in 2006, but her story began to unfold through medical records and distant cousins willing to talk. Her name was Maria Torres, a young, undocumented woman who had been pressured into surrendering her children during a time when the system preyed on people like her, scared, alone, and without resources. It was a painful story, but it gave them something they had always needed: context, compassion, closure. And then came the healing. Emily introduced Michael to her adoptive father, who greeted him with open arms and tears in his eyes. "You're her brother," he said, voice cracking. "That makes you my son too." Michael's adoptive parents, equally moved, welcomed Emily like she'd always belonged. "We always wanted more kids," Michael's mom whispered, hugging Emily tight. "Looks like we got our wish a little late." They created new traditions: Thanksgiving together in Chicago, Christmas on the Oregon coast. They cooked meals side by side, had long conversations over coffee, got into playful sibling arguments about music and politics and who got the better genes. They took a road trip down the Pacific Coast Highway, blasting 90s playlists and stopping to take ridiculous selfies in front of gas stations and diners. They were making up for lost time, yes, but more than that, they were building something that had never existed before, a future built on truth, trust, and shared love. It wasn't always easy. Healing never is. There were moments of grief that came unexpectedly, Michael breaking down when he found a photo of Maria, wondering what she had looked like when she smiled. Emily having a panic attack before meeting Michael's family, afraid she wouldn't be enough. But in those moments, they leaned on each other, because that's what siblings do, not just by blood, but by choice. Years from now, they will look back at the DNA test not as the answer, but as the beginning, a spark that reignited a bond science had revealed, but fate had always known. Because family isn't just who raises you, it's who finds you when the world goes quiet. It's who shows up, who stays, who says, "You're not alone anymore." And in that truth, Emily and Michael found the most powerful kind of healing, the kind born not from biology, but from belonging. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved us, don't let it end here. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever wondered if someone out there shares your blood, your history, your heart? Or maybe you've lived your whole life carrying a question that never had an answer, until now. Hit the like button if you believe in the power of connection. Subscribe to the channel if you want more true stories that remind us we're never as alone as we think we are. And please, turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment that could change everything. Because somewhere out there, someone might be waiting to find their missing piece, and it might just be you.